Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Digital Built Week. The final session is technology, the problem. Really delighted today to bring you this final session. But first of all, I want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Boomerang peoples of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land, and we pay respect to elders both past and present. So we have got a packed session for this last one. We have been talking about in terms of variety of different things this week. We started off with innovation and AI around from an agentic perspective, which was great. Really good to see different views and different viewpoints in terms of what does that mean? What could it mean? Really quite interesting as well, the need to push away from technology business cases and strategies and getting more into proof of concepts, which was quite interesting as well to see that. We also had our digital twin practitioners forum where we sort of introduced the concept of our horizons. And then we looked at in terms of the digital games precinct planning, which was a really interesting piece around what does it mean for the games from a digital precinct perspective. And we had the inaugural Digital Built Awards, and one of our panelists today, James Strutt, was one of the winning recipients. So well done to everyone in terms of who accommodation and awards last night, and yeah, congratulations to you, James, on the panel. So today, is technology the problem? We're going to talk through a bit that in with some esteemed panelists. And we've carefully brought together a variety of different people together, and we've purposely curated this to bring different viewpoints across the ecosystem. So we've invited Meredith Hodgman, who's the Senior Policy Lead for the Australian Computer Society, to bring her national views and also previous experience within sort of public and private. So we welcome Meredith. We bring Kelly from Wellington City Council from a local government perspective. Local government is a really interesting and key point of our delivery to public services, and tech is a key point of that. And then finally, we brought in James Strutt from New South Wales in terms of who's been leading the Land IQ project and is a director for strategic advisory. So what we're going to do today, we're going to sort of have two parts to this, and like everything at Tempo, we have really key points where we don't want to have any PowerPoints, people to come on and hide behind PowerPoints, and our panelists always enjoy that because they don't have to prepare anything for that, which is always good. But the key point we want to do is to get your input. So like many Tempo events, Mentimeter is going to be key to that. So we're going to invite you to join up with this instructions, and we're going to do this in two parts. We're going to do one in terms of understanding problem statements around is technology the problem? And then we're going to have some Q&A after that. So what we're going to do is for each question, we want to get a response from you, and I'm going to ask our panelists for a response. And then at the end of that, we're going to have a Q&A for you to ask some key questions. And then when they're bringing it home, we're going to have an action piece for that. So hopefully everyone can access those QR codes. So we just get people to come in and join. So we'll just give people a minute to bring that together. Okay, just slowly getting that in. So, questions for problem statements. So we're going to kick off with a hard one here. In your experience, who is primarily responsible for failed technology programs? Are we coming from a client perspective, consultants, technology vendors, or all of the above? Okay, we'll just get some more coming in there. Okay, James, I'd like to get your initial view on the response to this, please.
I can't see the numbers there, but I think that's pretty accurate in terms of all of the above. Um, as much as I think we'd like to point the finger and blame an individual party in this sort of thing, it really only works if everyone works together. So the vendors, the clients, or in our case, it would be the government, the users, the policy environment. There's a whole lot of components that go into making this work. So I don't think you can really say one is obviously more at fault of failure here. But I will say that something that I've definitely noticed is a lack of advocacy is probably the biggest killer, because without that, all the other components fall away. The funding falls away, the procurement falls away, etc. So I think you really have to have that leadership and advocacy as a, yeah, if I had to pick one, as a key component.
So when you're saying advocacy, is that advocacy from industry or is that advocacy within government or both?
I think or both, but from my perspective, obviously it's within government. Government's perspectives and priorities can shift pretty quickly, so you really need to have that advocacy that lasts beyond the political cycle, and that can be from the bureaucracy as well. But it's really having the people that buy into and believe that and continue to put support behind it. That's Without that, the rest of this all kind of drops away pretty quickly, as we're starting to see in some jurisdictions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, James. Meredith, are you surprised that tech vendors have come at the bottom there?
I'm relieved, I would say, Gavin. I was very pleased to hear James's instinct response there around advocacy, and I totally second that. And I'd go one step further and add to it that advocacy is totally critical in terms of not just attracting the right capital, but also in terms of communicating more broadly the business case, and that comes down to digital literacy. So the advocacy piece, both from a procurement perspective, but also from that internal capability. And I think too often, I'm very proud of government. It's not a criticism of government per se, but too often government does not really appreciate how much effort, time, and money vendors in particular have to put into what is ultimately a capability uplift of their own clients in order to be able to get that business, to get their project done, both in the pre-procurement stage when government or the client itself is trying to build a business case and doesn't necessarily have enough of their own internal digital literacy to be able to articulate the problem required to secure the funding they need, but also just as the project goes on, whether there's scope creep or communicating the benefits and the outputs. If we have small fledgling startups or we have innovators, or we have even just SMEs, the amount of money and cost that we really put on those entities to do our own capability uplift is too high.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Meredith. Thoughts, reflections, Kelly, in terms of what you've seen here?
I think if the question was around who's responsible for successful technology programs, I think it's all of the above, and I think that's true. I think for failures, I would put way more emphasis on the client. I think we have an obligation, whether we're working for government or working for a business, to shape up, drive, and complete these things successfully. And often I do see consultants or vendors blamed for things that actually sit squarely with those responsible for the outcome.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, great. All right, well, great to start off with that. So let's moving on to the next question. If you could pick one, what is the most common source of failed digital transformation projects? Is it around, Kelly, what's mentioned there around leadership? Is it around a lack of process? Is it around a lack of organization and culture, technology, data and lack of information and data, or implementation? What do you see as an audience in terms of your experience, the common source of failed digital transformation projects? Okay, good to. Okay, keep on voting now. We're getting up to about 50% voting there. James, while they're just finishing off their organisation and culture is coming up, are you surprised by that, or a lot of implementation it comes a cropper as well? So is that something you're surprised at in terms of the response there?
No, not at all. I'd kind of almost think about this in implementation would be in this bucket too, in the change process. Meredith kind of touched on it from like the client's capability, but if you're trying to do something that's transformative across a sector or a very large organisation, you can build the best technology in the world with the best outputs and most accurate data and all the rest of it. But if no one knows how to use it, it's sort of a waste of time. And if there's not a willingness to change current behaviours, then all that effort will kind of just go in the bottom drawer. So I'm not surprised if that's how I'm sort of interpreting this. Is it's the culture of the client that's procuring it, but then the actual users of the whatever's developed in the end. If that's not done right, the change management, it's sort of, you've got a nice shiny toy. This will sit on the shelf.
Yeah, absolutely. Kelly, have you got some experience where lack of leadership is sort of, you've seen some examples of that's come a cropper?
Yeah, I'm just thinking you could take out digital transformation. What's the most common source of failed projects in general? And this is pretty applicable. Interesting that, organization and culture. I mean, sometimes, but not always, the leadership is pretty responsible for the organization and culture, right? And the uptake of whatever kind of initiative is on the go. So certainly in Wellington, we've had examples of major projects, major digital initiatives, and major street transformations that have failed through poor leadership. Yeah, totally.
Meredith, is there anything we've missed on there, you think, from a category?
I don't mind being a tiny bit provocative here. I think the only reason a digital transformation project fails is if you don't learn from your lessons. I mean, so many projects that we've tried to get off the ground had not a lot of precedent before them. There wasn't a lot of, sturdy use cases available in the market. So a lot of projects that went first sort of took the hit, if you will, for the rest of us to learn from. And even internally, if, a lack of leadership or culture, it ultimately prevents the outcome happening that you wanted, then either A, make your first, MVP version of it smaller in the first instance, but just make sure that we're iterating off it. I mean, the challenge, I think, for, digital twins in cities, of course, is that a lot of this is public funding. And so the onus to not waste that money and to utilize that money is real. And no, of course, nobody wants to end up on the front page of the newspaper with their failed project. So I could just think, encouraging things to do smaller and to be more and quickly is probably the way around it. And I know that we're, a little bit behind schedule on some of our larger sports infrastructure vision related projects, which is disappointing, but how can we pick those lessons up and not be afraid to talk about them, afraid to put them out where they can be used, afraid that actually make sure that nobody makes those mistakes again?
Yeah, no, good point. Good point. Thanks, Meredith. Okay. Do you think that organizations rely too heavily on blaming technology for failed transformations rather than looking at issues like leadership and strategy? A simple yes or no, or unsure? Always like to see someone go against the grain there in terms of with a no. Look, I think we're starting to see a massive trend on there. James, is like you're working heavily within obviously the Land IQ project. You've done there's a huge amounts of leadership and strategic work and background work that you've done, and we're at the launch of Land IQ 6-7 weeks ago. There was a minister, a secretarial in terms of a component. It's quite clear that in terms of there's a large sort of strategic buy-in within New South Wales government. Has that been one of the success stories of Land IQ, that you've managed to get such good leadership and strategic buy-in?
It is. I think that we had a couple of crises that we managed to hook into to build that buy-in at that very senior level, and actually across both sides of government. So that bipartisan support's quite unique, I think, in this space, which is great for us, obviously. It's interesting, the results here. I mean, this has not really been my experience per se, in that people point the finger solely at the technology. I think a lot of the, maybe not failures, but where we've had setbacks has probably been more lack of clarity in communication on the requirements of what we want the technology to do and shifting requirements. So I think for me, the tech is getting more and more accessible and more affordable in this, at least in the space that I'm operating in. I think where you fall over and you waste time and money is not being clear on what your end objective is and what the end, and also building things too quickly before you really validate their usefulness. So it's interesting. I would have put a no for my personal case.
Meredith, how would you have voted?
I think I'm going to take the lens of leadership and strategy is not just organisational, it's also political in a lot of the projects that we're referring to at the moment. So from a political sense, I think that we probably don't have enough blame or enough, dare I say, encouragement to have more courageous leadership. Obviously, New South Wales has been a little bit spoilt in the legacy, but I think sort of at the national level in particular, we still don't have a national innovation strategy. We still don't have a national digital anything minister. But from an organisational perspective, I do think that the onus has to come down to leadership to set the outcomes of the project clearly from the beginning, or perhaps, more simply to define the problem more clearly. Like, we keep using this word failure, but it's only failed against the problem that you set it against. So articulate the problem, get the buy-in, but yeah, you need leadership for that. You need to not fear, you need courage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we all agree we're probably struggling with the moment here in Australia of a lack of leadership within government circles around digital and data, not only at a national level, but at a state level. I think it's progressively got worse over the last few years in terms of there's been less sort of initiatives and directions from a ministerial position. James, I think you're a bit of an isolated case there by getting that support. And when we spoke the other day, I was saying about what a fantastic story and case study it is around in terms of getting a minister to come up and talk about the value of data and digital to help improve in terms of from a housing, from a macro problem. Kelly, is that very quickly, are we seeing that lack of leadership as well in New Zealand as well? I'll just state from an Australian perspective.
I think definitely so. Like, I think the role of central government in making these transformations occur is like very light here. I don't think we've got a lot of drive there. But I also just think, and I don't know if it's just in New Zealand, but there's a bit of a reluctance to admit failures at all, I guess. So more often than not, they just sort of go away quietly rather than being examined at all or blamed on anything or anyone.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's crack on with the next question. So rank these. So why do you think many digital programs focus on expensive tools? We've gone from building information modeling, GIS, and then we've moved into digital twins, and now AI has entered the room. So we sort of start to move on from the next shiny thing, instead of first addressing sort of some of the cultural or organizational barriers. So I get the feeling that we need to be organizations need to be seen doing something in this space without necessarily understanding the problem definitions, unaware of the cultural issue, poor advice from consultants or other. So we get some votes to come in from here. And Kelly, I'm going to ask you first in terms of, from your perspective, is there a pressure within local government to be seen to be doing something new?
I think there's a desire to be doing something new, definitely. That varies a little bit across the board. I think if I was to just answer the question at all, I think the organisational barriers are way harder to address than just creating some job titles and implementing a kind of new work stream. For local government's big and complex, and there's a lot of different delivery functions. So the challenge is always to integrate and kind of tidy up, and that's not very exciting. It's tough going. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Meredith, something also that isn't very exciting subject is data and information, but it's a big hindrance to these, whether you're talking about digital twin programs, whether the need to visualize, integrate, connect different datas and AI. Are we sort of seeing that sort of desire to just keep forging ahead with the new tool without actually trying to fix some of the unsexy stuff, which I called it, is around information and data?
I did notice that data was missing off the question here, I won't lie, but I wouldn't put that into the unsexy category of life. I'd say with the built environment now, we're really at the point where the opportunity cost of doing nothing is so high that it no longer just has a productivity impost on Australia, it has a massive social impost on our housing situation. So digital programs that are, you know, innovating or being brave enough to adopt some of the more expensive tools that are out there, I don't want to criticize them for doing it, because at the end of the day, something needs to be done. There's very clearly problems. So you can't keep doing the same thing expecting the same outcome, a different outcome.
Yeah.
But in terms of your question around data, coming right back down to it, I do think that there's a pretty high cost with some of the data challenges that we have, purely from the time perspective that it's required to get it right and to fix it, or deal with some of the legacy issues that we have, whether that's about our archiving, our storing, or whether it's about upskilling our employees to have the digital literacy that's required to be able to participate and actually shift those cultural barriers. It's a really tricky problem. It's a messy one, and that makes it an expensive one, and therefore it makes it a little bit less harder to deal with, it a little bit less easy to get a quick fix. But you know, I think once we have got rid of that inherited legacy of, dare I say, poor archival systems, or when we can use some of the more emerging tools to leapfrog the problem, like, you know, to help us find all those data sets, identify the data sets, label the data sets, etc., then perhaps we might get some traction.
Right. Okay, let's crack on. Choose one. How many times have you seen a company's or organization obsessions with new tech distract them from fixing deeper business issues? James, I'm going to sort of get your commentary on this. Your views in terms of, again, moving from the next sort of time. We when we caught up the other day, we talked about I was sort of mentioning the lack of sort of marketplace movement around government, around AI, and in terms of some of the barriers around that. Can you sort of provide a bit of an overview of what we discussed then?
Yeah, I'm trying to think how it relates to this, but so if anyone works in government or has worked with state government in New South Wales, there's, I guess, a lot of hesitancy around doing any procurement that involves AI. I think the sort of robo-debt automatically making decisions and leading to bad outcomes, cloud is still overhanging a lot of the political parties here. So the hoops that you have to jump through to even consider AI in any kind of procurement, it's almost too burdensome for people to consider, so they just don't do it. The other interesting point that I'd flagged with Gavin the other day was, you know, government's very, and probably a lot of organisations are very connected in with Microsoft as a provider of a whole lot of services, including the, I guess, Copilot. And just sort of speaking from experience in myself using a lot of these AI tools, I really think they're quite a fair way behind the cutting edge at the moment of AI. And so if people are wanting to do something in government with AI, they've got these two massive shackles that are, I guess, holding them back from even thinking about it. But I know that there's a lot of problems that could be potentially solved with some of those solutions. Not sure that relates to the question too much, Gavin, on the screen, but yeah, that was the context of what we spoke about.
Yeah, brilliant. Meredith, is there anything further on your commentary on this?
I raised some really good points there, James. I think there's been an age-old dichotomy inside we're talking about digital transformation projects, we're talking about digital twin projects. And one of the things I think that a digital twin project has typically had the benefit of is that it becomes a project unit in its own right. It's such a big thing, an expensive thing. It's a project team is stood up. But a lot of the digital transformation projects more broadly that may have elements relating to digital assets, I think there's always this issue between the chief technology officer and the chief information officer. So in terms of fixing the deeper business issues, you often see this org chart issue of, are we fighting between each other? Is there internal tension? Who is the product owner? Who is the product sponsor, if you will? And I see that's where I think things get bogged down, and it's not specific to digital twins. It's specific. It's across the board. It's very pertinent inside government. I do think. I actually think it was Wellington's. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly. But doesn't your team report directly to the CEO? Like, that's an amazing org chart structure, which means that there's a lot more power to fix the deeper business issues at the same time as delivering the project, rather than trying to deliver projects within a constraint that's just, as James said, shackles you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Meredith. Right. I want to get cracking through these because I want to get some questions from the audience. Just a quick one around in terms of, is it easier for organisations to talk about tech rather than admit resistance to change or poor planning might be the real reason for failure? I think we've touched upon about this. I think we see this quite a bit with a lot of people that fail that with poor planning, or it could be from over planning as well, taking too long as well, in terms of taking too long in your strategic approach, and losing buy-in from that. Kelly, before we go into the Q&A session, any surprises there?
Oh, it's kind of a tale of as old as time, don't you think? Like, it's usually easy to point to technology rather than piss someone off or blame people.
No, absolutely. Okay, well, we'll keep going. Right, so we'll get just under about 10 minutes to get some questions to the audience. So hopefully in there, what key questions would you like to ask James, Meredith, and Kelly? And once they'll come in one by one. This first time I've used this feature within Mentimeter, so hopefully this all works all smoothly. Okay, so first question is progress hindered by a natural tendency for AI and automation confused by the non-technical? Right. Meredith, I think in terms of the way I read this is in terms of basically not being able to communicate what's the problem we're trying to solve in plain language, and probably to James's point is about how can you relate what his project has been supporting housing. Do we see progress is going to be hindered if we're not able to talk back in strategic objectives terms to get buy-in from strategic individuals? I think that's a common thing, isn't it?
Are you clarifying Ashley's question there? Sorry, Gavin, just to be clear. Is that the question on hand?
Yes.
Okay, super. Yeah. I thought tying it in from the last slide that we just had, this whole conversation comes right back down to advocacy. And I don't think that talking about the tech is necessarily a bad thing, as long as we're doing it with the lens that what we're really trying to do is understand it and better improve our digital literacy. And that's not just your stakeholders, it is actually your internal, business units as well. So in terms of getting those fundamental items down pat, I think that there's a real need to do a two-pronged approach, because articulating the opportunity cost to the business leaders or articulating the long-term impacts of not structuring your investments with an effort-led approach really ultimately is such a difficult challenge. Everybody wants to see the outcome happen within their political term. Everybody wants to see the outcomes, some low-hanging fruit. So if you can't find a way to communicate a two-pronged approach, like aim for the long term, but here are the short terms, you're in a real wedge. And I think a lot of our leaders, whether they're our executive teams or whether they're elected officials, they don't necessarily understand the tech well enough to be able to have the confidence to say, oh, actually, yeah, we really do need to prioritize this really ugly thing first, even if it means that our low-hanging fruit is going to be 3 months delayed.
No, brilliant. Thanks for that. Okay. Kelly, Wellington have gone through a lot of sort of programs, pockets of projects in terms of how have you sort of managed to sort of measure your sort of Wellington's digital maturity and track its progress against your broader program, or have you?
No, I don't think we have. I think we've made a lot of progress, and we have, I think, a reasonable maturity and capability in the digital twin space, and pockets of really good work happening in quite substantial ways. The underground asset register is one, our digital city model is another. Aligning that and tracking that against an overarching transformation strategy is something I was just in a meeting about this morning. We have a new CE, which is really exciting, who's really focused on this. So it's an exciting time to be alive at Wellington City Council in this space. But I would say how you do it is that you get buy-in very, very clearly up front. You track it very simply, and you regularly update and report on that. We haven't done that at all, but look forward to doing so.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. Next question. Is there any technology that you're aware of as a better enabler that we've previously seen? I'm not sure how you, in terms of respond to that. So I'll move James for you to nothing. Right, James, you've gone through this. How have you managed to sort of talk about the unsexy foundational is crucial before you do the digital thing? How have you done this for Land IQ?
I think a little bit of trial by fire, to be honest, because we didn't necessarily have all of this in place when we first did the MVP of Land IQ. And I think learn from our mistakes here when you've got real world, personal impacts on people from the outcomes of using digital tools. It really, I guess, solidifies the need to have this right up front. So specifically, we had to do assessments of different parcels of land for temporary accommodation for flood-affected people. There was a lot of competing interests of landowners, developers, people putting in who had ulterior motives, and we obviously needed to have a very sound, transparent, repeatable process that when we eventually were caught up in parliamentary reviews of different processes, that we could stand up to that process. We did, in the sense that we were obviously ethical, transparent, but it did become pretty obvious that there were major data gaps that were underlying the inputs going into Land IQ, namely around flood risk related data, which is sort of naturally a patchy space, unfortunately. So I think communicate that was sort of a post thing where we obviously everyone realised, and that eventually ended up in a recommendation by an independent flood report that came after that work. But look, I think garbage in, garbage out is probably the easiest way to explain this. It's really, really critical to avoid having to be in the front page of the newspaper if you can, by making sure it's right up front.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, right. See if we can get one more. The key issue organisers trying to apply a product rather than saying what the organisation needs. I am assuming that from a problem statement. Very few seem to are needed to trial solutions before deployment. Agree. Kelly.
We do see this a little bit, and in this, I'm thinking of an organisation as like the separate business units all around council, and I do think vendors and consultants have a little bit of a role to play here, because often we see that a decentralized approach works really well for them, right? So they'll come through the central channels might not get the answer they want, and so they approach someone else in the business who has a problem, and we then have a whole lot of admin and work to do in understanding what have we purchased, where is it, where's the data, kind of what's going on. And often we as an organisation will sign up to a trial, something really smart, some kind of dashboard, while we've got an existing contract running, and we haven't actually gone to the market. We haven't actually done the work to figure out what our problem is and gone to the market to ask for what we need. So we sort of just like, it sort of snowballs, and we just kind of roll along with these solutions that aren't integrated or fit for purpose. So I would agree that that is an issue.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get one more question before we go to all. Meredith, I'm going to ask you there. Do you think if that government created a digital pathway, 3D model development approval pathway, that would help or hinder the industry? So I think what they're saying is in terms of if government actually created a framework, would that help or hinder the industry? So it's almost a sort of a bit of a carrot and a stick, how much constraint you want to put onto that.
I think you'd be adding a layer of red tape. So in the short term right now, I think it would probably hinder. I think we're all out there trying to grapple with, mandatory or voluntary AI guardrails. The impost on red tape on small business is already huge. There's already a plethora of processes inside government, and it'd be more effective to look at where can you have the biggest, highest impact if we're trying to get better adoption right now. And coming back again to this advocacy point of view, which I'm obviously a little bit biased of myself, I think realistically speaking, what Kelly was just talking about, vendors do have a responsibility. I was a bit hard on government earlier, but it's like you see a lot of businesses out there that say, you tell me your problem and I'll create a solution for you, rather than seeing people go, let's really clearly define what the problem is, and then let's couch that problem in a manner that helps us to capitalize or to attract the capital that's already available. So in this instance, for the built environment, there's just absolutely no way that you can't say that the lack of productivity in the built environment is fundamentally a productivity problem, an economic problem, right? So define the problem, couch the problem in a manner that attracts extra capital, and then couch the manner in a way that people can understand it, and then just start communicating clearly. I don't think right now more pathways would be amazing. I couldn't help but laugh. There was an audit, and I have to confess, the name has escaped me. I could follow up later, in New South Wales, where they, an independent body surveyed all the different state government departments to ask them which AI tools they were or were not using to help understand whether or not there should be better communication to government about how their data is being utilised in AI tools. And a lot of the departments failed to participate in a timely fashion. But what I did think was an overarchingly interesting thing was that when the planning department was asked, nobody called out that the e-planning portal is itself an assisted decision-making tool. Like, there was that lack of understanding there. So I think, realistically speaking, don't create new pathways at the moment. Streamline what we have, make it as simple as possible to move forward.
Brilliant. Thank you, Meredith. Right, we've got 21 minutes left. We're going to be sort of focusing on a bit of action, really, but also starting to think about ranking. What type of risk would it take for organisations to shift focus from throwing money at tech to making investments in people, organisation culture, process as well? That the fourth one should be all rather than both. But is it a reputational issue, risk? Is it a financial or a political? Okay, so James, you mentioned not great to be on the front cover of the Age or the Herald or whatever newspaper it is. This tied back into your comment there around the political perspective. Nothing surprising there for you?
No, I think the financial one is actually a big one though here, and I think, at least here in New South Wales, the former government had a big push, I guess, to making a small government. So it was very much about bringing in the services from the private market where possible, and I guess that works to a point, but then it does become a more costly approach in terms of doing things like this. And so we have seen a little bit of a shift back the other way with the current government here. Even though it does cost a bit more upfront, having some internal capability, I think, is really important in here. And it also means that you're not beholden to the supplier of the day as well. And it creates that sort of mutual capability in the sector. So I would say, apart from the front page of the Herald, the financial one is a really big one I've seen as a driver here.
Yeah, Meredith, I think from an industry perspective, obviously, it's a lot harder now. We're entering this new sort of world where government spending is being reduced across the board, and digital investments are being seen as a bit of a nice to have rather than a key sort of enabler to improve productivity. And it's going to be very difficult to improve productivity by doing things we've always done. Sort of financial risks here, I think, are going to become more and more prevalent in terms of being able to demonstrate more for less. Is that what you're seeing from your members in terms of coming through?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. Not a lot of people have heard of ACS. It's one of the reasons why I like working here at the moment, to be honest. We're the professional body for the IT sector, which means we really care about professionalizing IT, no matter what industry that you're in, and had a really interesting and frankly inspiring opportunity recently to get a little bit of a look into a review of an APS level digital capability workforce strategic planning document, where they're actually looking at embedding in digital capabilities into both SCS and APS level employees to help incentivize better behaviours. So the reason that was so inspirational from my perspective is that it is a risk. You've got to go through the enterprise bargaining conversation. You've got to go through, is AI going to take our jobs conversation? And all of that type of stuff is human. And it's really a big reflection of, yes, technology shapes our world, but humans also shape technology. And so making sure people are feeling reassured, people are being invested in as individuals, making sure that we're not, accidentally tapping into the global conversation about mass sackings in government, etc. That is all, it is all political, it's all reputational, but it's also human. And so it's really, really brave to do it. And it was really great to see that that was happening. And I hope that as we see more governments dedicate that effort, that then they can secure more financial money, not just for training and development and capability uplift, but for the projects themselves.
Right. Thank you, Meredith. Right. Change management sort of come up a fair bit this week, and it's Adam picked up on the digital games planning session one. That's sort of change management's become a bit of a forgotten thing in some organisations. Back 10 years ago, we had seemed to have a far more lot of change management. I suppose the question is, well, how do we rethink? Is it time for leaders to think about how they manage change and sort of abandon those outdated approaches to digital transformation that fuels resistance? Kelly, I'm going to ask you, you've got a variety of different digital programs that have happened. How has Wellington sort of managed that change process? Have you employed some change managers, or are you in there in terms of helping to implement those new tools?
Yeah, we work with change managers, but I also think the general capability and understanding of change management around the organisation is improving. In the innovation space, we have an approach where there's really no easy fix and there's no kind of quick fix. So it is entirely based on working with the asset owners, business owners, project owners to implement whatever we want to transform and change through the way they operate. So that means it's slow going, but there's nothing that sits separately or outside of that work. So, but in terms of this question, I was also just thinking about, it's probably time for us to radically rethink how we're working in our cities. So less of a organisation only and internal approach, and more about the physical setting that we're in and the resources that we can share across utilities and our transport agency and things like that.
Yeah. James, you're a success story that people are now coming to you for your platform, your tool. How do you sort of view this sort of can others take sort of inspiration to what you've been able to do to sort of bypass that change rather than trying to get them on board, inverting that?
Yeah, I think a lot of and there's one I'm going through at the moment that's not Land IQ, but I think a lot of the failed ones that I see, it's where there's something that's imposed. So there's a solution that's been procured and it's being pushed down on people against their will in some cases, right? And they sort of have to comply, and that generally gets a lot of pushback, regardless of how good that software is or that tool is. What we've been effectively asked to do is to become a self-funded or like self-sustaining entity, which means we don't have the mandate card to play. And we've had to go in and actually prove the value to the users of Land IQ, and speaking with the executives of those organisations saying, look, this is solving one part of the project lifecycle that you're about to embark on or that you're planning. We're not trying to add an extra cost. We're trying to show you can do an existing part of your workflow at a fraction of the time and expense. And so you do it enough times, you've built up enough testimonials and case studies that, that a lot of these use cases are very replicable across different organisations. You start to build that evidence base that people, it's not just a mandate from top down. It's, oh, hang on, my budget's shrinking. I can either, let two of my staff members go, or we can give this a crack. And that's sort of how we build that momentum. It's definitely been a bottom-up buy-in rather than forcing it down people's throats, which never goes well.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks for that, James. Okay, so AI has entered the room. Everyone thinks it's your nan, your mum, your friends, your peers are all talking about primarily using Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT, Gen AI. Do you have optimism then that this new capability is going to fix the cultural issues that we've always faced? So like I said, we've gone from geospatial, we've gone from BIM, we've gone from digital twin, now in terms of with AI. Do we think that this will magically just fix all the problems that we've previously had, and we're just moving on to that? Right, and interesting, in terms of the second one is unsure. Meredith, views, comments. Do you think that, how do you feel that in terms of AI? Is it going to come and fix everything and be that silver bullet?
I think with every problem can be an opportunity. I love James's example of sort of the internal sales, if you will, or the internal cross-departmental conversations he's having, because that is consensus building. The one thing we can all agree on in the next sort of 3 to 5 years is that this level of change is preeminent. The known unknown is bigger than ever before. And, you can see here clearly the unsure category jumps out. So how we manage and tolerate that period of change is going to be really, really critical. And the best way, I think, and the way we're seeing AI being applied in not just workplaces, but across industry, is in that consensus building piece. Can we utilize AI to help figure out what we all do agree on, roll forward on that, and then articulate out what we don't agree on and have more nuanced conversations around that? So I hope that on the one hand, there are a lot of fears out there, but on the other hand, we can take those fears and turn those into optimistic opportunities.
Right. Kelly, are you surprised by unsure there for the response?
I am actually. Yeah, I feel really strongly about this. AI is not going to fix anything that we can't fix ourselves, really. I mean, it will help us solve some problems. There's no doubt about it. But I do see an attitude of waiting and seeing, because don't worry, it's coming to fix this problem for us. And I just really don't agree with that. I mean, I think if anything, that passive approach is particularly with generative AI. It's only going to lead to an exacerbation of the existing problems we're trying to solve as a city. If we don't kind of curate, cultivate, and participate, we will end up with tools that don't serve our needs.
Great, love it. Okay, what do you think we need to do differently with AI? Do we need better procurement to what we're doing? So do we need to do less business case work, more proof of concept? Do we need more early engagement with senior leaders, better change management? prioritise more employee, people-centric training programs or other? Okay, this is really interesting because this polling has completely bucked the trend from the narrative that we've had most of the week around in terms of less business case work, more proof of concept. James, can I get your sort of commentary and view on this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in the sort of built environment world, which I operate in pretty closely, I think accuracy is obviously incredibly important in any kind of output. And I think that's something that at the moment, AI, it doesn't have that, like that 99.99% level of accuracy in terms of what it can do. But I think where we've actually really started to leverage this is the ability to do that prototyping. So, proof of concept, less business case kind of idea, but more in the sense of there's domain experts in my agency and government that know land and property back to front. Our partners are much more on the software development and that sort of computer science end of the spectrum. And whilst it works, there is a level of friction and a time it takes to get that from one head to another. AI is actually allowing us to produce something that's very close to conceptually what we're trying to achieve really, really fast. And so it reduces that friction between the people that are developing the products or the technology and the people who are requesting that to be the function to be developed. So that's where I think we're finding a real use case for this at the moment, not in the actual end product, but in the developing of what it will do and look like in the first place.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll just get through this final question so we can get some Q&A before we wrap up. So put some more questions on here for we've got about 7 minutes left with the esteemed panel. What sort of key questions would you like to ask them around whether it's future tech, AI, etc.? Whilst that's coming in, panel, Kelly, are you some of the answers and so that have come through? Anything sort of coming out at you in terms of from the answers that we've got through?
I was surprised by the last slide as well, actually. In terms of, like, I think change management with AI is quite far down the track, I would have thought. And I would be, much more inclined to think that we need to articulate the basics quite a bit upfront first.
Okay, well, whilst we're waiting for some more questions to coming in terms of things, Meredith, thoughts, views?
Look, I think from an industry perspective, certainly, but also a citizen perspective, there's a couple of key levers to get the operating environment right at the macro level. And firstly, that's making sure the privacy reforms are actually finalised and not stuck halfway through, and we know what operating environment we're in for our data. Secondly, would be getting clear, easy to implement guardrails around the use of AI that are principles based, that don't hold us back, but also are safe. And third would be creating safer places or safer environments to test in and encouraging different types of testing. I think there's a role for government to play in getting those settings right, particularly so that industry can innovate more broadly. And I think that, I look at local government often as a lighthouse because, facing the coal face of the planners and the citizens, etc. So it's been really lovely to see the examples where local government in particular is taking a leadership role in trialling it and doing these errors for us. So there's only so much that each layer can do, but I think we've got to look a little bit at the who's responsible and who's accountable for getting those settings right so we can all play fairly.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question that's come in the chat box here. Is it a stretch to think that technology will resolve deep-rooted cultural issues in the workforce? Challenges are fundamentally tied to human behaviours and values and social dynamics that require comprehensive human-centred approaches and intervention. James, in terms of, I'm going to put this to you in terms of, do we think technology is going to help. So if we start at the start of the week, and Kelly was on around agentic AI, and the chap from Futuria talked about operating models and actually having a machine taking over some of the. Are we going to see that implementing machines to make decision points is going to help with this change? Or are we going to create another complexity, another sort of constraint there to operating and delivering these programs?
I think we will always have to have a human in the loop with this stuff. I think that if it's done right, it can massively improve the effectiveness of the people that are in that loop. So if I use things like a development application as an example, being able to really quickly analyze, where it may or may not comply, and really allowing like a council officer to focus on where there's slight deviations with the developer. I think that's a really, really good use case for something like AI, because it, I guess, reduces the mundane administrative work and really promotes that consistency, and targeting the real issues rather than the data entry and that sort of thing. So, I don't think government will ever be in a position to take the humans out of that loop completely and offload the whole thing to AI. But I would hope that we pick up some of those capabilities around, data ingestion, transformation, and highlighting the issues to be considered more clearly and quickly.
Meredith, closing thoughts?
We've just got this period of uncertainty ahead of us, and I hope we can take it as an opportunity to do deeper learning within ourselves and genuinely care about our workforces. I think, we all work really, really hard, and the people who sit next to us are ultimately the things that get us out of bed every day as much as the output. So no, that's a really sort of heart place to come from at the end, but it's really great to see people caring about their workforce.
Yeah. And Kelly, final thoughts from you?
Just reflecting on the question on screen too, I guess. I think it's good to run, and I think that these things can just become the vehicles or the drivers for the change that we want to see anyway. So whatever that looks like, sometimes it's just the language and the framing and a kind of united perspective of what's aiming to be delivered. But I don't think for any smaller local council or anyone, I don't think it's wrong to start, because it can be what allows you to improve and innovate as you go along.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, look, we've 2 minutes to go. So first of all, really want to thank everyone who's stayed online to be part of this, and also thank you to Kelly, Meredith, and James for your invaluable thoughts. We are now finished with Digital Built Week from Tempo Institute for 2025. We hope you've enjoyed today's session. We also hope you've enjoyed the week where we try and disrupt a bit of different thinking rather than the normal carousel of presentations, etc. Adam and I are going to continue with delivering these events across the year, and we're also going to be bringing Digital Build Week 2026. So on behalf of everyone and behalf of Adam, thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and we look forward to collaborating with you all in the future. So thanks, everyone, again. Thank you.